Hello! In this video, we're going to walk through things that you can do after you've activated your Outpost server. You received your server, you installed it inside of a rack, or you laid it on top of a flat surface, you plugged everything in, you've turned it on, and you've activated it. And now you have active capacity. What next? The first thing we'll do is we're here in the console. Let's go into the Outpost service page and verify that you have an Outpost there, you can see it, it's active. In this case, we're going to use server 02. And here you can see the status is active, which means we're now ready to start using our Outpost server to run our workloads. The first thing we're going to want to do is create a subnet on the Outpost server. To do that, you can go to the CLI and do it, or from this page here, with the Outpost server selected, you can click Actions and create subnet. This is just like creating any other subnet. You're going to select a VPC. This video assumes you have a VPC created. We're going to select this one labeled workload. We're going to give it a name, call it demo subnet. We're going to give it a CIDR. We'll use the /24 here. We don't need any more tags. You're welcome to put more tags if you'd like, but for our purposes, the name tag is sufficient. Click Create Subnet. We now have our new subnet, and we want to verify that it was in fact created on the Outpost. So if you select that here, you can look at the details, and if you scroll down, there's a field called Outpost ID. If that Outpost ID isn't populated like you see here, that means that the subnet wasn't created on the Outpost and it was created in the region. So double check and make sure that the subnet that you've created is in fact on the Outpost. The next thing we'll do is we're going to launch an instance. We'll go to the EC2 page here, and we're going to do a plain AL 2023 or Amazon Linux 2023 instance. We'll go ahead and select Launch Instance. We'll give it a name, so Demo Outpost Instance. We've got Amazon Linux selected and the Amazon Linux 2023 AMI selected. We'll leave that alone. The instance type, so this will depend on how you have your server configured. In our case, this server is configured with all C6 ID XL slots, which means we can launch C6 ID.xlarge instance sizes on the Outpost. We're not going to need a key pair here. We're just going to use Systems Manager to interact with our instance. Let's edit the network settings. The workload VPC is correct, however, the subnet is not. The only way that the control plane understands to launch an instance on an Outpost server is by you launching an instance that is configured to be on an Outpost server. So if you select a subnet that is in the region or is in one of our local zones, that instance will get launched in the region or the local zone and not on the Outpost server. In this case, the demo subnet is what we just created. We've validated that it's on the Outpost server, so you can be sure that the instance will launch on that Outpost server. We're going to enable the public IP here because we want to use Systems Manager. I don't have any private endpoint set up for Systems Manager. So for the purposes of this demo, we're just going to enable the public IP. We don't need a new security group. You can create a new one if you'd like. I'm going to use this one, which I don't believe has any rules in it. And the storage, we're just going to leave the same here. I'm going to select Launch Instance. And it's now successfully initiated the launch. We can go back and monitor the progress. Currently, it's in a pending state. We'll come back once it's fully launched. All right, we're back. And as you can see, the instance is up and running. Both checks have passed. Let's go ahead and connect to the instance and look at the networking configuration. We're going to use Session Manager to connect here. Let's jump into a bash shell. And let's look at the configuration. So as you can see, there's the loopback adapter, and then there's one interface with the 172.16.100.72. That's the IP from the subnet that we created on the Outpost, and there's no other adapters. Typically, one of the first things folks want to do after their Outpost server is activated is they want to launch an instance on a subnet on the Outpost. They also want to test connectivity from the instance on the Outpost server to something on their network. And you can't do this with the ENI or the Elastic Network Interface that every instance comes with. As you can see, this one was provisioned with that network interface, and then we have the loopback, and there's no other interface. On Outpost servers, there's a new interface type, which we call the local network interface. And this has to be configured per instance, and it can be configured either during launch or after launch. In this video, we're going to go through how to do it post-launch, but check our public documentation. It also has steps on how to do it during the launch of an instance. Before we can actually start using local network interfaces, we have to tell our subnet on the Outpost how to interact with these interfaces. And in order to do that, we have to modify an attribute on the subnet. So to do that, we'll go to the CLI. But first, we're going to need to go ahead and copy the subnet ID of the subnet we want to modify the parameter on. So this is demo subnet. Let's copy the subnet ID. Now let's go to our CLI, and we already have credentials set in order to interact. If you don't have your AWS CLI configured, you're going to need to do that first. We've already done that. And it's going to be AWS EC2 modify subnet attribute. We're going to specify the subnet ID that we just copied. And then the attribute that we want to modify, it's called enable LNI at device index. And then we're going to specify device index number. This is typically 1. What this does is when you launch an EC2 instance, the network interface that gets attached at device index 0, and that's your ENI. What we're doing now is saying if a network interface gets attached at device index 1, that actually needs to be an LNI and not an ENI. And I'll show you what that looks like after we've attached one. And then for me, I need to, this Outpost server is connected to US East 1. By default, my shell is using US West 2. So if I don't put a region here, it's just going to error on me. Okay, no errors, no messages. That's typically good news. Let's double check that the attribute was set. We'll do an AWS EC2 describe subnets. And then again, we'll use the subnet ID to filter out anything else. And as you can see, it doesn't exist because it's looking in US West 2 instead of US East 1. All right, now here you can see about the sixth attribute down. You can see enable LNI at device index, and that's set to 1. Now let's go back to the console and create a new network interface for us to attach. We'll go back to the EC2 page, go down to network interfaces, create network interface, call this demo interface. We will put this on the same subnet as the Outpost server, which is demo subnet. Here you have an option for the private IPv4 address. You can auto sign it or custom. This interface is going to get and use a IP from this subnet. However, it's never going to be used for communication for this specific interface because the interface, which will become an LNI, sits outside of VPC. It's a layer 2 interface that appears on your network, on your local network, sort of outside of the outposts or outside of the VPC. So while it's going to have a VPC IP assigned to it, and you can see that in the console, it's never going to be addressable. You're never going to be able to communicate to that interface over that IP. You can select a security group. I actually believe you have to. We're going to add just a name tag so we can identify it if we need to in the console. And then create network interface. You can see here the demo subnet interface was created. Let's go back to our instances and attach it. Before we do that, let me show you what the networking currently looks like before attaching this additional network interface. So we can go down here. You can see I have one interface. It's ENI dash a bunch of numbers. If you go all the way to the left, you'll see it says interface type and it says elastic network interface. This is typical. This is normal. This is what you'll see when you attach one or more network interfaces to an EC2 instance. For Outpost servers, because we modified the subnet attribute to tell it that, hey, if an interface gets attached to device index 1, that's not actually an ENI or an elastic network interface. That is an LNI or a local network interface. And the local network interface is specific only to Outpost servers. You're not going to see that anywhere else. Let's go to networking, attach network interface. And we'll select the demo interface and click attach. Okay, so that's been attached now. Let's go back to the networking and check it out. So we'll go back down. So you can see I have a second interface. You can see the demo interface in the description. It did pull an IPv4 address from the subnet, from that VPC, or from that subnet CIDR of this 100.94. Think of this address like a fake address. You're never going to address this address to send traffic over this interface. And if you scroll all the way back over, you can see the interface type is now a local network interface. Anytime you see a local network interface in the console or in, if you're looking in the CLI and doing a describe on it, it's always an interface that is associated with an instance on an Outpost server. If we go ahead and go back to our session manager, into the instance, we're still logged in here. If I now do another ifconfig, so you can see now I now have an additional interface and I have a different IP address than what the subnet CIDR was. And in this case, it's 10.6.100.118. That is coming from my on-premises DHCP server. So local network interfaces can get an IP from a DHCP server that you're running on premises, or if you're not running one, you can statically assign it to the interface once you've attached it. This IP is only visible within the guest operating system as of this recording. If you go, again, if you're back in here, you see that it's a local network interface, which is your indication that this is an interface that exists only within the instance on the Outpost server. But the IP, you won't see that 10 IP here that we see of 10.6.100.118. For communication from anything from within your VPC or with something with the region, you're going to use this ENS5 interface to 172.16.100.7.2. That's your VPC IP. Anytime you need to communicate with something on your premises, or if you just want to direct traffic outside your premises, maybe to the internet, it's going to use the ENS6 interface or the 10.6.100.118. To recap, you started with an Outpost server that had been activated, but nothing else had been done with it. We created a new subnet on the Outpost server. We then launched an instance on that subnet, which was on the Outpost server, effectively launching an instance, it running on the Outpost server. We then took the Outpost subnet and modified one of the attributes in order to enable the LNI at device index 1. From there, we created a new network interface and then attached that network interface to the running instance on the Outpost server, which at that point gets attached at device index 1, which turns an ENI into an LNI, or an elastic network interface into a local network interface. That local network interface is what you use to communicate or send traffic from an instance on an Outpost server out to your local network. You'll use the ENI to communicate with other resources within the VPC on the Outpost server, or with resources in the same VPC or other VPCs in the region. Thanks for watching.